Okay, so this is a packet tracer I prepared earlier. It wasn't a big job. There's only a few little devices on here. And so we've got two hosts, a switch, and of course they're all connected together. I've also prepared a text document with the commands I was going to look at. Now, of course, as I said, Chapter 2 is talking about configuring Cisco iOS devices. And so here's the switch. And so I just clicked on it. By default, you get the physical tab. There is a config tab, but you don't get that on a real switch, so I rarely look at that. And then there's command line interface. And so part of the chapter is learning your way around the iOS, so Internet Operating System. No, they didn't steal it from Apple. It's the other way around. And so if you look at the prompt that we've got here at the moment, it's switch, which is basically the host name. Now this switch is behaving as if it was straight out of the box, and so that's its default host name. And then you've got this, the rest of the prompt is actually the greater than sign. And that tells you that we're in user exec mode. Now, I can actually use one of the help functions of the iOS as the question mark, and that actually tells me what commands I've got available. And there's not a lot. And because I'm in user exec mode, I can look at some stuff. I can't change anything. And so the major thing we care about typically in user exec mode is the ability to actually type in the enable command, and that will actually get us into privileged exec mode. Now again, this is a switch that's straight out of the box, and so there's no password set, and so it went straight into privileged exec mode. On a live switch on a live network, that's not a great thing. You should be password protecting that, but we will show you how to do that in this session. And so you'll notice that the prompt has changed to the host name followed by a hash instead of the greater than sign, and that hash tells you you're in privileged exec mode. So again, I'll do the question mark, and there's a lot more commands available. And so one of those commands is actually configure. So that actually gets me into configuration mode, and that allows me to change the settings on this switch. And so configure is not an option in privileged exec mode. So that's one of the major changes between the two. Of course, the other one is you can configure anything and look at anything. So configure terminal is the command. And what that's saying is I want to go at enter configuration mode from the terminal, which is of course what I'm typing at. And so you can see the prompt has changed again. So this config means I'm in global config mode. And so I can actually change the host name if I like now, because I'm in global config mode. And so let's call host name of Fred. As you can see, the prompt is now changed to be Fred, global config mode. And so that's one thing we've changed. If I wanted to change access to the console port, you type in line con 0. Oops, meant a space. Line con 0. And you can see I'm actually in line configuration mode. And so now all the settings I type into this will just configure the console port. In global config mode, it affects the entire router or switch in this case. So if I want to get out of this sub config mode and back into global config mode, I just type in exit. And if I want to get out of global config mode and back into privileged exec mode, I'll type exit again. All right, so what things do we want to do on our switch? So as I said, I prepared a text document earlier. And so I've got these two first commands here, and that's just to make sure I'm in config mode before these commands are applied. And so EN is short for enable. And so you can actually abbreviate the commands for a Cisco iOS. And so if we look up here, the only command that starts with ENA is enable. And so, or EN actually is enable. And so that is enough to make it a unique command. And so you can actually abbreviate commands and save yourself a lot of typing. So that's what I did when I created this text file. And so conf T, again, the only one that starts with CONF is configure. And so that's enough for it to be unique. And remember, you had to put in terminal. Well, that was the only option that started with a T. So conf T is enough instead of configure terminal. And so then we're going to set the host name. I've already done that once, but we'll set it to a proper name. Now, remember I said that it's a good idea to have a password to protect enable mode or privilege exec mode. And this is actually how you do it. There is the enable password command, but the preferred option is actually enable secret. And so what the secret does is it actually grabs that password, which is going to be class, and it actually hashes it. And so it makes it unrecognizable. And so from then on in, when it asks you for it, you type in class and the router will hash it again. It will actually compare the hashes, and that's actually how your password is checked. So enable secret is the best way of setting an enable password. All right, now we already went into line console mode, but it didn't actually do anything. One of the major things you do with that is you can actually set a password. And so what that's doing is it's actually protecting user exec mode instead as well. So before you can do anything, you actually need to know this password. So that sets the password, and login actually says, I want this password to be used. Now, the next one is line VTY. Now, you'll notice that line con, I just had 0 because there's only one console port on the device. Now, line VTY is actually virtual terminal. And so that's either Telnet or SSH. And we've actually got a range available here. So it's 0 through to 15. So there's actually 16 possible connections there. And so again, we're setting the password to be Cisco and log in so it will use that password. Now, the reason that we're using class and Cisco as passwords is to get you guys in the habit just for while you're doing labs here. I would not set these as passwords on a live device on a live network, but because you're setting passwords on a device that you may well leave on that device, if we have well-known passwords, at least other people can access that device and do what they need to do on it. So that's why we do it. So that's set a Telnet password, a console password, and an enable password. So that's a good start, certainly. We can also do what's called a banner message of the day. That's what MOTD stands for, message of the day. Now, to set a message of the day, you actually need to first define a delimiting character. So basically what this says is, all right, the first character I'll give you is a delimiting character. When the command sees that character again, so here, that means that's the end of our message. And so the actual message will end up just being this, authorized access only. But yeah, so these hash characters are actually just letting the command know this is where it starts and this is where it finishes. That's all that does. As soon as you put it in the config, it will actually change it to a Control-C anyway. Now, if you remember when I was in console config mode before, I typed exit, and that put me back in the global config mode. Then I typed exit again to get me out of that and into privilege exec mode. If I actually type in end, whichever config mode I'm in, it will actually put me straight back into privilege exec mode. So that's what that end does. And copy run start will actually save the running config. When you configure a Cisco device, you're actually configuring the running config, the one that's in RAM. That's nice, but of course, RAM is volatile. If the power was lost or turned off or whatever it might be, that would be blank again. And so this is basically saving the config from running to the startup config. So again, I've abbreviated those. And suppose I can demonstrate that here. If I do show running here, running config, you can see that I've set the host name to Fred. I don't think I've set anything else on this switch at all, but it's all there. if I do show startup config, it says, hey, it's not present. So if I do copy run start, just hit enter for the default name. If I do show start now, it's actually got that configuration in it. And so as you probably saw earlier, it's got the host name of Fred in there. So basically from here on in, I'll just, oops, wrong one. I'll just copy this and paste it into the command line. And you'll notice that happened instantly. So it's a very nice little setup. And that's what makes command line a lot quicker, is being able to do things like this. Now, the iOS command line is a bit like Linux. No news is good news. And so basically this command went through, it worked, and so it doesn't tell you about it, it just is ready for the next command. Again, we've set this password, and it's just ready for the next, and so on. So as long as you see no error messages, it has all worked. So let's do a show run again, running config. And you can see that the enable secret command is in here, but this certainly does not look like class, does it? So this 5 actually means that it's an MD5 hash that follows. And so what this is the hash that results from typing class into it. So you'd never guess that. All right, so looking at the rest of the config, I haven't done much there. You can see the banner is in there. As I said, it's changed it to Control-C. And you can see that the password's been set on the line console and the VTYs. Now, it's actually split them into 0, 4 and 5 to 15, because back in the dark ages, they only had 0 to 4. And then when they added this extra functionality, they just sort of added it on separately. But because I did 0, 15, it did both at the same time. Now, this is bad. I've got a password in there that's in plain text. So that's not real good. So there is actually a command that we can use to hash that as well. And I'll talk about that in the very near future. All right, so I've configured the VTY connections, but I actually haven't given this switch an IP address. Now, switch doesn't need an IP address to do its job, but it does need one if you want to remotely administer it. And so basically that's one thing I'm going to do in the near future, is set an IP address for interface VLAN 1. And so I'll give it an IP address. Now you'll notice that interface VLAN 1 has a shutdown command. So to get rid of that, we actually do no shutdown. I've just abbreviated it. And so that will actually turn the interface on. On Cisco devices, all layer 3 interfaces are turned off by default. So you need to turn them on. It's just a security thing. And then remember these passwords that are not hashed, well, they call it encryption, but it's really hashing. And so service password encryption will actually fix that. So let's paste this in as well. And we'll have another look. So show run. Okay, so what did we do? We set an IP address, and that shutdown has now disappeared out of the config because I did a no shutdown. And you'll also notice that it doesn't show Cisco anymore. It shows this hash. Now, remember I said it's a code 5 for MD5? Well, there's no such thing as MD7 that I've ever heard of. And also, this is a very short hash if you compare it to this one. So this 7 hash is actually a Cisco proprietary one. It's not great, actually. I'm going to say it saves you from shoulder surfing. If someone looked at that, they wouldn't be able to figure out it was Cisco unless they're some kind of mathematician savant. But there are actually websites that if you paste this hash into it, it will actually tell you what the original password is, or at least one that will work. And so hashes, the whole point of them is they're actually not supposed to be reversible, but of course this one is, so it's not a very good hash. But anyway, but as I said, it does save you from shoulder surfing. There are other methods that we can use to secure these ports anyway, so this is just the very basic way of doing it, but it's certainly pretty good. So now we've pretty much done all we need to do when it comes to configuring in the switch. That's all we needed to do. Now you'll notice that I've always done the copy run start at the end, so the configuration has changed. You'll notice that I do that as well. So that's a very quick way of doing these things. All right, so that's the switch done. So it's got an IP address. If I hover over that, it should show it. There you go. So you can see the IP address there as well. And you can see that all the ports belong to VLAN 1, so that's why that VLAN 1 interface works. All right, so we've got to configure the PCs as well. They don't have IP addresses, so we're actually using .10 for this host. So 192.168.1.10. If I hit tab, it will use the default subnet mask, and that is fine by me. I'll do it in the other host as well. 192.168.1.11. Default subnet mask is good. Now this is basically the host operating system's interface, and so I set the IP configuration there. You can do other stuff as well, but at the moment we'll just look at the command prompt. So this is like the DOS prompt. So I can type in ipconfig, and it will tell me that the IP address is 192.168.1.11. I can ping the other host, 192.168.1.10. That should work beautifully, and it does. The switch is .2, so let's try that. Eventually, it takes a little longer to respond to ARP requests, a switch for some reason. But that did work. Now that's nice. So we do have connectivity between the hosts can talk to one another and the hosts can talk to the switch. Let's use that VTY. So there's a Telnet SSH client in here. I'm only going to use Telnet at the moment because SSH takes extra configuration. 192.168.1.2. Connect. And now it's prompted me for a password. Now, because I'm using Telnet, it's actually going to be that VTY password that I set. And you can notice also that we've got the message of the day that's appeared. So Cisco is the password. Voila, we're in. Switch 1. Enable to get full access, and class is the password we need. So that's a much better secured switch than it was to start with. It's been configured and it's remotely contactable. So that's very nice. So I can do a show running, and I can see the configuration. All seems pretty good. Now, I suppose there's one way that I haven't shown you. And so you can also, of course, use the console cable. Now, this lightning bolt here shows you all the connection types. And light blue, of course, is the color of the console cable. So if I choose that, I can plug it into the console port there. And the RS-232 port on a PC. Open up the PC. Instead of using command prompt or, of course, that tab on the switch, we can actually use the terminal emulator. So on a Windows PC, most people actually use PuTTY, but this has got its own terminal emulator here. So these are the settings that's required to go over that light blue cable. So 9600, 8 bits of data, no parity, 1 stop bit, no flow control. So once you do that, you go OK. And yeah, there's a bit of a problem here, but exit. It should actually come up with this for a password. And so it's been misbehaving. I think there's a bit of a glitch in Packet Tracer. But anyway, so Cisco is the password for the console port. en, class is the password for enable, and again, show running config works a treat. And so it's actually going through that light blue cable to the PC. So that is pretty much all the connectivity we need to talk about today. So of course, if there are any questions, you can email me about that, and have a nice day, and I'll catch up with you again later.